Welcome to all those who join in using the platform of a temple of thoughts to reflect on contemporary events and to attain an objective, factually valid, and impartial understanding of contemporary events. This brief video will offer an insight into the unspeakable human tragedy in progress in Manipur. The pattern, of course, is quite simple and familiar. Two tribes are at war with each other, and allegedly the state is partisan in this particular conflict. The exact nature of that partisan role I do not know, and that's not the point of my interest at this point in time, though that's certainly a serious issue. My task in this brief reflection is to offer a perspective perhaps not on the whole of this huge, humongous human tragedy, but on a historical aspect of it. What are we make of this event, which is extremely disturbing, which strikes everyone who even reflects momentarily on it as something pre-modern or even archaic? This is not the kind of situation that should prevail in a modern, secular, liberal democracy. All of us know that the hallmark of democracy is the rule of law. Clearly, the rule of law has failed in this particular context. So our attempt is to make sense of this reality from a historical perspective. If you look at the emergence of democracy, you will find that democracies evolved out of the feudal system. In other words, when human beings or human collectivities outgrew the limitations of the feudal order, the democratic form of governance came into being. Now, what is the hallmark of the feudal order? It is simply this, that when an issue arose, the two groups or two individuals, if you like, who are party to that issue, instead of resorting to law or litigation, they decided to fight it out. Now, for example, you have this idea of the joust. Joust is a medieval, pre-modern institution in which if two people had a grievance, they would challenge each other, or a person with a grievance would challenge the person who he thinks has caused the grievance to a duel. And whoever wins the duel is assumed to have justice on his side. And obviously the one who loses is deemed the offender. So this is the institution of the joust. Now, clearly the principle that governs this institution of the joust, J-O-U-S-T, is the pre-modern feudal notion that might is right. It is assumed, though it is not stated in so many words, that God, or justice if you like, is on the side of the better fighter. And a few centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte, at the beginning of the 19th century, if you like, said something very similar. Though by then the feudal order was on its way out. He said, God is always on the side of the bigger battalion. God is always on the side of the bigger battalion. What did Napoleon mean by this? He meant that might is right, and that God himself approves this kind of a system. Or God takes the side of the mighty. So woe unto you if you are weak. So this was a kind of crude notion that prevailed for a very long time in human history. And only when humanity emerged from this very, very unfortunate, unjust, crude, uncivilized notion, that the necessity for accepting the authority of law and accepting also the civilized approach to the redressal of grievances, namely shifting from the foundation of might to litigation, or the placing oneself under the authority of law. That's how the concept of the rule of law emerged. Now, therefore, it's absolutely clear that where there is the rule of law, or in a society where the rule of law prevails, the use of physical force can simply not be allowed. So if there is a government that believes in the spirit of democracy, it will not allow, no matter under what circumstance, it will not allow citizens or groups of citizens, big groups or small groups, to settle issues with the use of violence. Because to permit it is to be party to harking back to the old, crude, uncivilized idea that might is right. So when I look at the Manipur situation, I'm afraid I have to say that the only way I can see this is that this event, which has now raged for so long, and in relation to which I have to say the central government is not taking a forthright and effective stance, because I cannot believe that the central government does not have the wherewithal to bring this turbulent, riotous situation under control. If the state admits that it does not have the ability, or the power, or the authority to bring the situation under control, then the state discredits itself, and the state is actually admitting that it has failed. It becomes a failed state. So no state that respects itself will allow the rule of law to be openly challenged, and for such a long period of time, in such a violent and barbaric fashion. So what is at work here from the perspective of political philosophy is not merely some kind of tribal war, which it is. It's a tribal war. But more than that, in terms of our democratic thinking, it is harking back from the discipline of democracy to the anarchy of the feudal order, in which the aggrieved party could mount an attack on the presumed or putative offender, use its physical might to worst the presumed enemy, and prove that right is on its side because it is mighty. Now, if you allow that principle to work out, if you allow that kind of a scenario to prevail and become chronic, then willy-nilly you are undermining the most fundamental democratic principle of the rule of law, and it can have serious ramifications in other parts of the country. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I hope it doesn't happen like that. I wouldn't be surprised if this conflagration spreads from Manipur to the other parts of the Northeast, and maybe, who knows, from there to the rest of India as well. I hope to God it doesn't happen. But it is very essential that this tragedy is brought under control, and that right away. It's become already too late. And I pray to God that good sense would be given to those in authority so that they would keep political electoral calculations out of this madness, intervene effectively in the interest of the health and wholeness of Indian democracy, and ensure that the authority of the rule of law is established and established firmly, that no citizen and no group is allowed to take law into its hands and hijack the country back to the feudal times where might was right and normal democratic life and processes are upheld and restored in the troubled state of Manipur. It's high time that people all over the country start thinking about the actual implications of a major event like this. We cannot simply be bystanders and say that, well, it's happening at a distance from us, why should we bother? We should bother if we love the country. We should bother if we cherish the democratic culture and stature of our country.